Audio check.
Teams audio check.
Right, good afternoon everyone. It's 2:30 p.m, so we will get started. So, welcome to this meeting of North Somerset Council's Executive. I'm Councillor Mike Bell, Deputy Leader of the Council, Vice Chair of the Executive, so I'm chairing today's meeting, and I'll come on to that in a moment why. But just before we get into it, just to remind you that in line with public health advice, we are operating with restricted numbers in the council chamber today, and we've got some members and officers who are participating via Teams, so they can take part in the meeting, but they're not formally recorded as being present. So the only voting members today will be the 7 members of the executive who are present in the council chamber. And just to remind you, we will be streaming this, or we are streaming this live on the internet, so in the words of Big Brother, please do not swear. And a recorded version will be available after the meeting. So the first item on the agenda is addresses by members of the public. We haven't got any that were received in advance of the deadline, but I know that there have been a couple of submissions that have been sent in over email. So just to acknowledge that we have received those, they'll be passed to the relevant executive member for response. So if you have sent something in to us, please be assured that we are looking at it. Apologies for absence. So formally, the only apology for absence is from Councillor Davis, the Leader of Council. Unfortunately, Don has had a positive lateral flow test, so is awaiting a confirmatory PCR result, but is obviously self-isolating in line with all of the government guidance. But I'm sure that we will all want to wish him well, and he's here with us via Teams anyway, so I'm sure that he will participate. Okay, item 3 is the declaration of any disclosable pecuniary interests. Any members with any? Nope. Okay, good. Next is the minutes of the meeting on the 8th of September. So they've been circulated. Councillor Caniford moves approval. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Petty. Okay. Next, non-executive councillors' addresses. We've not had any notification, I believe, of any non-exec member addresses this afternoon. So we'll move on to items 6 and 7. So that's matters referred to the exec not already on the agenda, and the West of England sub-region. On both of those, there are no matters. So we'll move on to item 8, which is the forward plan dated the 1st of October 2021. So I move that the forward plan be noted. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Cartman. So we're flying through, great stuff. And so item 9, so this is an update on the development of the joint bus service improvement plan for the West of England and our negotiations with bus operators. So I'll move the recommendations, and if I can have a seconder, Councillor Bridger, and then I'll invite Councillor Davis via Teams to just give us some introductory remarks. Is that okay, Don?
Yeah, good. Yeah, apologies I can't be with you for reasons that Mike's explained. I'm rather confined to barracks. I thought that I was going to be making this statement in a reasonably neutral way, but the news that we've just received around the Portishead rail line and the further delay on the development consent order is not only extremely disappointing for us as a council, the residents of North Somerset, and it's especially all those who work so hard with our officer teams to get the bid as far as it is now, but it also brings into stark contrast the very importance of the bus as the only public transport medium we have in North Somerset if we are going to move towards both our net zero objectives and also to offer genuine alternatives to the car. And I'm sure people in both Portishead and Pill will be extremely disappointed when they realise that the reopening of the line has been yet delayed. So there's a very detailed document in front of you, the bus service improvement plan. It's come to this council, so this executive, on more than one occasion. We signed it off in June, the initial statement. I mean, the ambition within it is to move at least 100 million bus passengers per year within 10 years. We want to make sure that everybody within North Somerset has access to a bus or a dial-a-ride service. We want higher bus frequencies with a good range of destinations and connections, far more than we've got now. We're very cognizant of the 24/7 economy which we now live in, so there are bus services early morning, evenings, at night and at weekends. I think everybody wants a much cheaper, simpler and affordable fare system with multi-operator ticketing. You buy one ticket, you can get wherever you want to be within the West of England area. To be aware of the need for that affordability for families, and have a bus network that is a single system, so that it's very much part of a network, and those stops also need to feed into our wider transport plan in terms of active travel and indeed, sorry for mentioning again, into our rail network as well. So you can more easily walk and cycle to bus stops, or indeed catch a train to a bus stop, and then you're on journey from there. I think with the bus passenger charter is a pretty key part of this, because we do need to make sure that the service that's being provided genuinely meets the needs of passengers. And the current system of almost that's a byproduct of profitability. We need reliability and consistency, and also we really want every bus to meet at least the Euro 6 emission standards by 2023, with a range of zero emission buses as soon as possible afterwards, and indeed first electric buses to be available very, very soon. So that is the nature of the document and our aspirations. The next stage is to produce the final joint BSIP, and the recommendation be made today is that we do that, and then we need to get on with the very hard work of producing this enhanced partnership to start delivering from April of next year. And just to put that into contrast, the bus enhanced partnership in Hertfordshire took over 2 years to create. So we are very much up against it in the area, and we do need to get on with it. But I'm absolutely delighted to recommend to you colleagues the recommendations and indeed the bus service improvement plan.
Thank you, Don, and I applaud your heroic dedication to bus service improvement to make that presentation whilst feeling low. Colin, anything you want to add from an officer perspective?
The only thing I would say is that in terms of the papers, there is a draft version of the bus service improvement plan attached as an appendix. That was very much the state of the document at the print deadline. And clearly there has been quite a lot of work continuing over the course of the month to really sharpen that up. So hopefully it gives a really good flavour of what the bus service improvement plan is all about and what it's trying to cover. But it will be substantially revised and updated, because I think it's fair to say it was quite an early draft. And clearly that's feeding into the recommendation about Councillor Davis providing that final sign-off. So I just wanted to draw that to members' attention.
Okay, that's great. Any questions or comments from non-executive members? Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to ask if there's any impacts from yesterday's announcements by the government. I haven't been able to absorb them all, so maybe you have. First of all.
You're referring to the decarbonisation announcements in relation to COP26, I assume, yeah. Very much in line with what we already knew about their plans around decarbonisation, and there's nothing that in the BSIP that needs changing. In fact, our BSIP is trying to set out a more ambitious timescale than those that the government is setting at a national level. So, for example, it talks about decarbonising buses by 2040, I believe I read yesterday, and we're aiming to try and do something more like 2030 in terms of the bus services in our area. I mean, clearly that will be dependent on what funding we ultimately secure, but our ambition is to go faster than the government is at least setting at a national level locally.
Well, that's very good. Could I just ask a detailed question under 7.1? You've got taking a local bus emits a little over half the greenhouse gases of a single occupancy car journey. Doesn't sound like much to me. I mean, is that actually correct? I'd expect it to save more than that. I did look up the reference you put in there, and basically it's just a news article that doesn't go into any detail anywhere else.
So I'm not an expert on that, but it obviously that will be an average, and the emissions per person will be very much related to how many people are on the bus. So that will be an average amount. So during the peak, when you're carrying the most people, I would expect the figures there to be significantly exceeded. But we know that when a bus, is returning sort of empty, actually then the emissions are actually going to be quite high because it's the driver. So that will be an average. Clearly, what we can do is, one is the whole decarbonisation agenda in terms of changing the powertrain of the vehicle, but two, and fundamental to the BSIP, is if you get more people using public transport, the emissions per person will drop, and we will improve on the figures that are currently quoted in the document.
Okay, that's great. And I just want to suggest while we're here, I know I thoroughly approve of this document, but wondering whether we in the meantime could, in terms of car journeys, encourage people to do small things that might help, like carry less weight in the car. We all carry stuff around in the car all the time. That increases the use. You could actually drive only half full rather than filling your car up. These are all little things that will chip away. Remove carrying boxes. Leave the car at home, obviously, and travel with more than one person in the car. And I'm wondering whether we shouldn't actually put a little bit of effort into putting this into the public domain or even on the website so that people can follow those rules.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I mean, you've partly done that already, haven't you? Exec colleagues, so Councillor Petty first and then Councillor Caniford.
Thank you. I just kind of wanted to reflect on bus use in my area at the moment and how what I perceive the residents of my community are feeling. Certainly the bus was, so I represent Backwell, and the bus was well used to transport people to work in central Bristol, and the bus service was regular and consistent. However, COVID did change things significantly, but as we see people trying to return, we find that service is so diminished, and really it doesn't offer a robust service anymore. So I do really welcome this work taking place on this bus strategy. As Councillor Davies said, only when we have a reliable and affordable bus service will residents feel like they have the right options out there to leave their car at home. Last weekend in the village, a blind man stopped me and asked, could we look on the app to find out when the next bus was to Nailsea? This is our nearest town with our nearest shops and services, and the market was on. And when we searched the app, there would be no buses on a Saturday. No buses on market day when you know that people want to go and use those services. So my husband went and got the car and drove him there because there was no means to get that blind resident to that service. And that just feels like we're absolutely failing our residents. We're failing our residents who have any inequalities and disability issues that would make it preventative. And it is an impact that impacts our community in an inequitable way. And I really worry about whether we're addressing our fair agenda, which I think we're not, until we can turn this vision and this bold ambitions into practice. And it needs to be felt on the ground. So I really welcome the work being done, but what we need to do is deliver it, not just say that we're going to do it. I also think that the cross-boundary work, so the fact that it is west of England, is really relevant because we know that people don't want to get a bus to the edge of North Somerset. They want to travel to either Bristol, or those living in the Chew Valley might be travelling to Bristol. So likewise, so the fact that it's cross-boundary, I welcome. And I do think that it's sometimes challenging to work across those boundaries as west of England, but I hope that we will commit appropriate resource to making sure that we can work together to provide that service so that people can have a frequent and affordable service so that they can be connected up. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. So Councillor Caniford and then Councillor Cartman.
Thank you. And it's just a couple of questions really for Colin. In terms of 3.13, Colin, and key objectives or aspects, I can't see there mentioning any mention about types of buses, sizes of buses. So some communities which are more difficult to get to, current stock makes that more difficult again, which means then council have to change its policies to be able to allow that to happen. I am a little concerned and would like to learn a little bit more around the risk of funding the development stage. We are seeking funds from WECA if we cannot get West of England funding, but it's just a little more, just a little concern about our own commitments. And again, I would like to learn a little bit more about the mitigations that we would take if funding was removed, which I personally don't trust this particular administration in Parliament. And once it's blown off the headlines of papers, it will be forgotten very quickly and they will pull the funding. Will we then find ourselves in a position of being an administration that has to cut bus services? And that concerns me a great deal. Do you have any comments to put me at ease?
I think just starting with your last point, I think that risk does exist. I think you're right to highlight it. I think the funding that government has said is being made available is for a fixed period of time, and we don't know what the funding arrangements are obviously beyond that period. I know that is something that the LGA have been raising with government as well, in terms of needing that much longer term settlement around funding for bus services. But you are right, there is that risk that at the end of 3 or 5 years, if the government doesn't carry on the funding and the patronage hasn't grown sufficiently to cover all the operating costs, we could be in the position of having to be much more closely involved in the decision around what services continue and what services are removed than perhaps we have in the past. Because it is an important point that this is a very significant change in the way buses are operated and regulated in this country since privatisation in 1986. It does put local authorities much more central to the process. And obviously that is a double-edged sword. It gives us more influence, potentially to deal with some of the issues that Councillor Petty raised in terms of connecting communities up, but also obviously when, and I think almost inevitably it will be when, there are hard decisions that need to be made, we will be more involved in that and cannot perhaps so easily just blame it on the commercial operators as we've done in the past. So, it is beholden on us to continue to encourage people to return to public transport. As we stand today, bus use is at about 70% of pre-COVID levels. It got as little as 8% back in the first lockdown, so it's come on a long way. And while there have been some reductions to the service level pre-COVID, again, as Councillor Petty intimated, it's still operating at over 90% of what was operated pre-COVID, and there is government funding that is bridging that gap. And again, I would agree with you. It seems unlikely that funding will remain there forever and a day. So we have got to get patronage back up to pre-COVID levels, which is what the bus service improvement plan and why we're investing and trying to encourage people to do that is all about.
So before you answer the other two, just so we stay on that, can I ask then, I think there's something about the signage that needs to go on buses, and shouldn't we be making the point that this is a government funded project? So if they pull the funding, we pull the project, and therefore government carries the can and not the local authority.
Yeah, I think there is something in terms of how we communicate to the public, and that's something that the BSIP talks about in terms of how the system is presented to the public, and the guidance does talk about presenting it as a single system rather than a disjointed system. And I think your point about what happens if the plug is pulled is something we need to take away and reflect on as part of that. I think the point about vehicle size is quite an interesting one. it's much harder now than it used to be to have a large range of vehicle sizes, and that's very much driven by disability legislation around vehicles. So that makes it quite tricky. But in the more sort of substance of the document, we do recognise through looking at demand responsive transport, which potentially uses smaller vehicles, that has a role to play in our hard to reach communities. I mean, it's not picked up in the objectives, but I can assure you that it is sort of covered in the plan. But yeah, I just need to sort of flag up that it's not quite as straightforward as it used to be, but then I wouldn't want to go back to an inaccessible network for disabled people either. So, you know, there's compromises there. Could you just remind me what your middle question was?
The funding or the risk of funding regarding the development stage and the 800,000 possible shortfall if
yeah,
you didn't
so
get
the
additional
latest
funding.
on that is actually we're well within budget in terms of the funding, so so there isn't really a particular problem around that.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Colin, Councillor Cartman, and then Councillor Gibbons.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Colin. This is a great report, and I'm just going to talk about the information section of the report because I think that's really important, picking up on what Councillor Petty said. I know, you know, I live with a lot of young adults, my kids, and I talk to their friends, and they really rely on the app as well as the RTI boards to a certain extent. And what frustrates them more than anything is when it's unreliable. So I think, you know, making sure that has prominence is really useful. And I guess this is slightly related. I'm hearing there are issues at the moment where buses are cancelled, you know, when they're saying they're 3 minutes away and says cancelled. And I don't know whether perhaps we can pick up or you can direct me to the person to pick up with the bus providers, because I'm sure they know when a bus isn't running, when it doesn't leave the bus station, but it seems to take a long time to update those screens. And I think in a period where buses are being cancelled, it would maintain the integrity of the bus system if people just had accurate information. Thank you.
Yeah, I can assure you that has been a hot topic over the last 2 or 3 weeks in terms of our engagement with operators, because clearly we've been having similar complaints from members of the public. I mean, they are affected quite significantly by the national driver HGV driver issue, not helped by our own government writing to bus drivers and encouraging them to become HGV drivers. But yeah, that is a very, very live issue. I mean, first, fundamentally, are trying to tackle the root cause, which is bring the driver situation back under control. I mean, normally they would expect to have lost mileage of less than 1%. Due to sickness and things like that. They have been up at over 5%. So you can see it's a very significant increase. They are bringing in agency drivers, and they are looking and reviewing the timetable again. And I think it's always difficult. And I saw Councillor Petty sort of squirm a little bit there. Sometimes it's better to offer a slightly less frequent service that is reliable than it is to have lots of cancellations. In terms of what we can do in the RTI system, one of the things that we are trying to do at the moment is make sure that we can push live updates and dynamic messages, and that's something that we've really highlighted in the BSIP. The RTI system at the moment is quite static, and so that means it's quite difficult when something happens at short notice. And one of the big issues that we're having at short notice at the moment is that the drivers that do turn up to drive a bus are then getting pinged by their app, or they're getting their test results and are literally at the start of the shift having to then withdraw. And that's when we need to get information out much more quickly than we've been able to at the moment, and why some of those problems that you're describing are happening, because sometimes it is literally at the start of the shift that drivers are withdrawing. So all of that area of improvement is something that the BSIP identifies, but we're not waiting for that. We are trying to work with operators to get on and deal with that as we speak.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Ash. So I've got Catherine, and then I'll come lastly to Councillor James on Teams.
Thank you. It kind of follows on from what Councillor Cartman was saying about cancellations and people not having information. One of the barriers I've found speaking to people from hard-to-reach groups and also young women and girls is the issue of safety. And in the light of various things that have happened this year, you know, the idea of being out slightly later than you plan, missing a bus and being stranded somewhere, is something that causes genuine fear in young people, particularly girls. So I'm just wondering what is planned to mitigate this, to make people feel that bus transport is safe, and how can we communicate that to people so that we get people back, those people back using buses? Because obviously it's a vicious circle, isn't it? The less people that use a bus at 7, 8 o'clock at night, the more fearful people will feel about being on it. So the busier they are, the better they are.
Yeah.
So that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you've started to answer your own question. Part of it is getting people back to using it and building that confidence into the system and getting that virtuous cycle. So clearly there's a lot in the document about encouraging use, but specifically in terms of sort of safety-related measures. One of the things that we want to look at is sort of bus stop standards and improve the quality of the waiting environment, thinking about lighting, perhaps thinking about CCTV in certain situations where that might be improvement, and really have a much more structured approach to how we deal with bus stops and what are the appropriate facilities at bus stops in different locations. You know, clearly it's going to be difficult to have CCTV at all, 1,300 bus stops that we have across the district. That probably isn't practical or possible. But I think, there will be locations where actually, maybe in, town centres where there might be, antisocial behaviour issues on, say, Friday and Saturday nights, where actually extending some of the existing CCTV coverage that we already have to make sure that they're properly connecting with important bus stops would be, I think part of that. I think just pushing the safety dimension a little bit as well, and it's something that the leader has really been encouraging as we've been looking at this plan, is to be thinking about the routes to and from bus stops as well, and making sure that there are safe walking routes, cycle parking that can be secure, and those types of issues as well. So that's how we're trying to deal with it through this plan.
Just quickly, yes, I'm pleased to hear that, because a lot of studies show that the importance of place can't be underestimated in terms of safeguarding. It's the whole broken window syndrome, isn't it? If a bus stop is tatty and poorly maintained and there's litter around, it won't inspire people and it will encourage antisocial behaviour. So we have to break that pattern.
Yes, one of the things we're including is in the bid is for additional funding for additional cleaning and maintenance. Unfortunately, our budgets are very, very small. I think it's £7,000 we have to clean bus stops and bus shelters, which obviously doesn't go very far when you've got 1,300 across the area. So we are including a funding bid for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. Thanks, Colin. And Councillor James has withdrawn his request to speak. I think he's actually travelling on a bus at the moment, so the internet signal is a bit erratic. Okay, so I've got no more speakers. We've had a proposer and seconder, so can colleagues indicate their approval, please? Thank you very much. Okay, we will go on to the next item, which is item 10, Councillor Gibbons on the Winterstoke 100 Academy expansion.
Right, excuse me. I've got a bit of a sore throat. I haven't got COVID. I have been tested, so you're all safe. Other illnesses are available. Thank you. Yes, I'm here to present the report which has been drawn up very comprehensively by the projects team, and I thank Tom Frost for this one. It is for the contract award for the design and build of the Winterstoke 100 Academy expansion. I won't read through the report in great detail because I'm sure colleagues have all read it. But you'll be aware that this is part of the Housing Infrastructure Fund bid that we approved some time ago. And this grant gives to North Somerset Council £97 million thereabouts. And in agreement with Homes England, it's to build the bypass around the village of Banwell and supply the additional secondary school places that go with the delivery of 7,557 new dwellings. Now, obviously, the objectives we have for the Winterstoke 100 Academy expansion are listed here, and it is worth, I think, drawing your attention to the fact that, obviously, we have to make sure we have the capacity for at least 900 extra school places by 23-24, to provide infrastructure that enables the housing development across Weston-super-Mare, to be innovative and efficient and offsetting carbon from design and construction of the infrastructure, to ensure the development provides opportunity to increase biodiversity net gain by at least 10%, and proactively engage with stakeholders respectfully, openly and honestly. And we hope that we'll construct school building that students, parents and teachers feel proud to attend. And I have to say that some of our recent projects have fulfilled that brilliantly. You know, when you see what's been built at Chestnut Park in Yatton or Locking Parklands. So we have a good track record of producing some very beautiful buildings that inspire learning and make the community proud. Another key issue is to deliver value for money for the local community and for North Somerset residents by ensuring that the building costs are within national benchmarking, and to design a school that meets the DFE, North Somerset and local planning authority requirements. We want to ensure that the school design is flexible so that it will be easily and economically adapted to meet future challenges and changes in educational delivery needs, and to build a school that, above all, is capable of being used by the local community outside of school hours so that it becomes a part of the community and a central asset for everybody to use. So obviously these objectives have informed the preliminary designs, and Kier Construction were appointed in January 21 to design the expansion. I've had a lot of meetings with officers, with ward councillors about this, and with members of the public, and I can say that there's been a lot of consultation as well with various stakeholders and members of the Parent Carers Forum in North Somerset to make sure that equality issues are addressed. And I feel that this is going to be an enormous advantage to North Somerset. If there are any further questions, I'm lucky to have the Director of Children's Services on hand to answer anything that I can't. And Naomi hears from the projects team. I'd also invite my colleague, Councillor Bridger, to make a comment, because we've had a discussion about point 3 of the recommendations, and we have a change to propose. So basically what I'm asking the executive to approve is, 1, the award of the Winterstoke 100 Academy Expansion Design and Build Stage 2 contract to Kier Construction Limited. 2, to increase the capital budget by 2.1 million, funded by Section 106 contributions, to align the project to the values included within the original business case submissions. And 3, to delegate the Director of Children's Services to enter into the final contract with a capped value, subject to the acceptance of the final due diligence detailed within this report. And I don't know, Councillor Bridger, whether you would like to mention your small amendment at this point?
Yep, go for it. Steve?
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to, well, first of all, say that I wholeheartedly support this report, welcome it. I've been quite close to it, as this is obviously a big capital project, and Councillor Gibbons was quite right to remind us all, I think, that the Housing Infrastructure Fund project is
not just about Manwell Bypass, it is absolutely also about delivering a significant, important educational facility as well, one that will be net zero carbon when in operation. The design uses passive house principles, and I think Councillor Petty's also involved in trying to see what we can do to improve still further in that area in what we've got planned. As Catherine said, we are on site with the enabling works, and we hope to get started with the main build, the construction work, I think on the 22nd of November. So, yeah, so mindful of this sort of gap between today's meeting and hopefully approval of this report and receiving the final stage 2 build cost submission from Kier in about a fortnight's time. I wanted to propose just a minor amendment, really, because I know that officers would absolutely consult with Councillor Gibbons and myself about this, but I just wanted to change the wording, or propose that we change the wording to recommendation 3 slightly, so that it reads delegation to Director of Children's Services in consultation with the Executive Member for Children's Services and Lifelong Learning and the Executive Member for Assets and Capital Delivery. The rest can stay the same. As I say, I know officers would do that anyway, but I think it's important to have that stated. So I'd like to move that amendment. I mean, I think that obviously Kier are obliged to get best value for this contract, and they've gone out to the market, obviously. But I think it was incredibly important that we brought the report to this executive meeting, because we don't have another executive meeting until the 8th of December, and waiting that long would potentially really put at risk the opening the school up in September 2023. So hopefully exec colleagues will sort of approve the report on that basis and accept my amendment.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I'm happy to accept that. We have obviously had discussions about it, so it doesn't come out of nowhere. One other thing I didn't get around to mentioning is I'd just like to say that if you look in the report, I think it's really very impressive the work that Kier is doing around social value and creating employment, and also we've already got one care leaver doing a kickstart job with them, and there potentially will be more. So it's benefiting us in many ways. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Steve. So I can't see any... Oh, hang on. Councillor Cato on Teams. Question, comment from you.
Thank you very much for that, Chair. So I'm just looking at the section on climate change and environmental implications. I'm looking at paragraph, that appears to be the 4th paragraph, and I'm looking at the consideration of carbon in operation and embodied carbon materials. I mean, I see that as a statement, but I don't see that as numbers. I don't see any quantifiable definition of carbon cost in the construction and carbon savings in the operation or the life cycle. And I'm wondering if, not necessarily at this time, but I would be interested if that could be brought out and made visible, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cato. Do you want to take that, Councillor Gibbons?
I will. Funnily enough, we had a brief conversation, and I have Naomi here who might well be able to answer it more completely than I, because we discussed that this might come up. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so we did discuss this earlier, and it is something that Kier are working on as part of sort of their offerings at the moment. I can't recall the numbers off the top of my head, but obviously we have got some principles in place to ensure that we are maximising on that aspect. But we can certainly pull together and let everybody have sight of going forwards.
So thank you. I do appreciate you all working and doing to the best standards that you can achieve on this.
Yeah.
but let's have the numbers, please.
Yeah, of course, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Right, so I'm going to take Councillor Gibbons as having proposed... hang on, Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question about what it's a double-headed question, really. I can see there's a 1.4 million increase in costs in this report. And I'd just like to ask the general question. Obviously, we're all aware of the increasing costs in buildings at the moment. So what is our confidence? 2 questions. 1.4 million, what is it? Why have we got more costs? Secondly, how confident are we that during the lifetime of this project we're not going to see some very large increase in costs?
Well, again, we have had some lengthy discussions about that. And in fact, you've seen in the report, sadly, Brexit and supply chain issues have affected costs. I know that Kia had done a lot of advanced purchasing, hadn't they? Naomi will correct me if I'm wrong, in certain areas. Do you want to give some more detail around that?
Yes, of course. So the additional money that we need to complete the project comes from, like Councillor Gibbons has said, the supply chain, the availability, the requirements of the build, the things we didn't know when we sort of went and secured this money. There are, the prices. We're going into a fixed price contract with Kia to protect the council, and that's part of the reason why we've come now, because we were getting these costs, and the nature of the market is that they don't fix for very long. So if we wait, it could creep up, and the longer we do that, the more risk there is surrounding it. So that increase in the budget that we've requested has been validated, scrutinised by North Somerset and our employees agent to make sure that it is a valid and a valid cost, and that what Kia are providing us is competitive across the board. So we're confident that I wouldn't like to say there's going to be no big surprises, because you can't say that, but we have done all of our due diligence to make sure that we have looked at every aspect, and we are as confident as we can be going forwards.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that we do hear rumours, and they are just rumours, that some areas prices may actually come down. So I don't have any, I have to be honest, confidence that that will necessarily be the case, but I do believe that we've done what we can to mitigate against further increases. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. I think if we can get anything that reduces prices, then we'll all be dancing in the streets, because that's not happening very much, is it? Right, okay, so I'm going to take it that we've had a proposer and seconder from Councillor Gibbons and Councillor Bridger with the amended recommendations. So can colleagues indicate their assent or otherwise? Lovely, that's unanimous, thank you. So the next item is item 11, which is the commissioning plan for the provision of in-home lifts. So this is in my name. So this is a proposal to procure a contract to deliver in-home lifts like stair lifts, through floor lifts, platform lifts and step lifts, which is all about enabling residents in North Somerset to remain independently in their homes, and is funded via the Disabled Facilities Grant Programme. So the report is to kick off the commissioning approach to procure a new contractor to undertake this work in time for the renewal of the current arrangements in February 2022. So I move the recommendations and look for a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Solomon. Any questions or comments? I can't see any. So, oh no, Councillor Caniford.
I mean, it's a question you might be able to answer, Mike. Does this cover the cost of maintenance and ongoing costs of having facilities put in people's home, or have they got to cover that themselves?
I don't know.
I'm happy to find out later. It's not a problem.
Okay, I'll find out and come back to you, yeah. Councillor Petty.
Yeah, I'm just catching up and checking on that. It's good to see this section in the climate change and environmental implications made reference to the reuse, because well, personally, in my family situation, they've recently got a chairlift for my father, and so there is absolutely no need to be purchasing new should there be sufficient equipment in our area. So just really keen to see bids and tenders that recognise the reuse market so that we're being efficient with our resources, really. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Bridget. Okay, no further comments or questions. So can I have all those in support, please? Thank you very much. So that's approved. The next item is Councillor Cartman, item 12, the latest month 5 budget monitoring report.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I think as I often do with this, I'll ask Amy Webb to give us an overview and then I'll pass a few comments after.
Thank you. So members will note this is the 21-22 budget monitoring for month 5, which is the period to the end of August this year. So sections 1 and 2 in the paper provide the background to the revenue budget, which has been familiar from previous papers. So I'll just talk briefly about section 3 onwards, which outlines the forecast for the financial year. So that's page 131. So the current forecast position is £2.6 million over budget, of which 1.24 million has been identified as attributable to COVID funding in particular and can be mitigated through that grant. However, that leaves a residual overspend position of 1.327. So that's an increase of around £200,000 since last reported at month 4. So the significant budget pressures remain in place and in the Adults Directorates in particular. The adults, there's quite a lot of breakdown in the report about the demand and the changes in service pressures being experienced there and in place, particularly around income losses, homeschool transport and some residual staff savings within the Directorate there. So at the moment, the report is not recommending any further financing of the budget pressures beyond using the COVID reserve as identified for that 1.24 million. We do have a contingency within the revenue budget, which could be called upon at the year end, and obviously consider any impacts and risks on the reserves position as well, but we'll continue to look to mitigate those risks as we go through the year and identify any savings or carry forwards which might be able to offset that. So page 140 onwards talks about the capital budget and identifies in particular there's a suggested variance of £4.1 million for the proposed programme for this year. So that relates to 2 projects in particular, which is the Stoke 100 Academy, as we've just seen in the report. Fortunately, those costs can be mitigated through grant funding, but the other issue which is raised in this report is about Western Town Centre projects, currently seeing a cost pressure around 568,000. So whilst we don't have a proposal to mitigate that budget and fund it at the moment, we can see that tracking the expenditure to date and the commitments for 21-22 means that we can be quite confident in delivering the capital budget within the existing funding envelope for the year, but obviously we need to consider affordability of that and impacts going forward. So I'll finish there, but the report goes on to obviously outline any other risks that we've identified in the narrative and note the 2 recommendations at the beginning of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. That's great. A couple of comments from me. I think it's definitely a comprehensive report, and thank you for you and the team for setting it out. And it's really very detailed and covers things very comprehensively, so good for that. But I kind of think this is actually quite a good news report, actually, in a strange way. I mean, I think my worry when we went into the pandemic would be that when the tide of government funding receded, we would find we'd been swimming with no costume. I think this report shows that we are not financially exposed in that way, and I think that's good news. And I think that shows the dedication and hard work of all the officers, not only in finance but across the council, really. There is a gap, though, so I think there's no time to be complacent, and I think you've outlined the pressures are the usual suspects. We will continue to fund people with ESN placements, homeschool transport, and we will continue to work on those challenges, and I have every confidence the finance team will work towards those so we can work towards a balanced budget. One final thing really from me, we continue to kind of update and try and refine the report, and one thing that I was keen to see that is in there is in Appendix 6, which most people may not make it to the appendix, but it does now detail the total budget spend of capital projects underway. Both that have been spent and that are budgeted. And I think just to reflect, that's £576 million worth of capital programme, which is huge. So I think there's challenges ahead, but I do think this should be taken in its context of a council that is carefully and prudently looking after the finances and taxpayers' money. And I recommend to accept the recommendations on the front.
Thank you. Ash, can I have a seconder for the recommendations? Yep, Councillor Solomon. Any questions or comments? So, Councillor Solomon.
Yeah, looking at the Western Town Centre enhancement scheme and questions in there, there are things in there about utilities providers, etc. Where utility companies are getting things wrong because their details aren't correct and they're double digging and not finishing things in a hurry, do we have any way of holding them responsible for those costs rather than they go on to our final cost?
I believe we do. I'd have to come back to you on the detail though on that, Mike. I think that's probably the thing. I know we review all the capital projects, as you know, through a monthly or 6-weekly capital kind of project strategic board and keep an eye on those costs. But I think they'll probably depend on individual contract details. But I'm happy to have a look at the enhancement scheme for you, unless Councillor Bridge or Amy can add anything at this stage. We'll take it away.
Yeah, I know, because I do hear quite a lot of stories of roadworks that are being delayed because the utilities are digging up 3 or 4 times because they've forgotten where their particular points are that they need to change.
Thanks, Mike. Councillor Caniford.
Just one comment and one question, really, and based on what Councillor Solomon is saying, Mike was saying, the fact is when they dig these roads up 3 times, we get 3 times as many potholes that we have to then be fixing. Because let's be fair, the utilities repair very badly. Can I just ask a question around the shortfall in place? And is that more to do with shortfall in revenue or overspend? Because I think it's quite important to distinguish the two. Because quite clearly there are some pressures on people visiting town centres, events, parking, things like that. So is that registered in another place or is that all part of that shortfall?
Thank you. So that is part of the shortfall, and we are looking where possible to utilise COVID grants. So unfortunately, the sales fees and charges income that we were getting some compensation from the central government about ceased at the end of June. But we are seeing the ongoing impacts of those. So I know the Directorate is doing a lot of work in terms of mitigating and trying to bring down those pressures, but ultimately they're kind of being seen in the system at the moment. And obviously we want to use the COVID grant wisely, as it may be the only funding that we get.
So the point really I was seeking was the fact that it's not the Directorate overspending, it's just the difficulties of COVID.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't see any further questions or comments, so can colleagues indicate their support for the recommendations? Thank you very much. Okay, next item 13, Councillor Cartman again, MTFP and revenue budget update.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm pleased to present this report. As we know, as a council, we have to balance our budget each year, and this report sets out the information and noting how we're developing our medium-term financial plan for the next 3 years. The report shows we're currently projecting a budget gap in the region of £3.8 million for the next financial year on a base spending position of £178 million. And just to put it in context, that's about 2%. Now, it doesn't sound like very much, 2%, but given how tightly we manage the council finances and given the story of the last 10 years, it will require a significant amount of work to bridge that gap. Any budget, of course, is a balance between what we have coming in and what we have going out. But however, caps on what we can raise in terms of income from our residents and the legal requirements upon us to provide certain statutory services mean we have, in reality, very little room for manoeuvre as a council in terms of the choices and decisions that we need to make. Nonetheless, we do have a little bit of room for manoeuvre, and I think there is a statement in this report that's very, very important, and that's that at all stages we will do whatever we can to retain and protect the frontline services that so many of our residents depend upon. I'm not going to go through the report in detail, because it's there for members to read at their leisure, but it is worth noting that council officers are presently working on savings plans to bridge that gap, and I will update the executive at the next executive meeting. I would like to draw your attention to section 3.4 though, which is a really good section on the risks we face as a council as we put our budget together, and that's really that we're at that stage now in terms of understanding those risks and how they could translate into a financial impact. I think there is quite a lot in there as well about the recent announcements by the Prime Minister in terms of the social care announcements, and I'll make a couple of points quickly on those. £36 billion has been said it will be pledged to be raised by a 1.25% tax or levy. The first point to understand in the context of our budget here is that those funds are not intended to support existing social care pressures or demographic or demand growth rises or cost inflation. They're intended to place a cap on care costs for those of us and to prevent people having to sell their home, which may be good news for homeowners, but not necessarily for us as a council. This does give us a tricky message to deliver for residents. This MTFP at the moment is being planned on the basis of a 1.99% rise in council tax, but there is also the adult social care precept. Many residents may expect that the additional tax they are paying next year through national insurance will be sorting out social care. The reality is it's just to subsidise homeowners' care fees, and that local councils will still need to raise council tax, and I'm sure that won't be particularly welcome. Secondly, the new levy will of course increase our wages bill, and although the government have announced that they will pass the extra money to us for that, it is yet unclear about what happens when we have contracted out services. And as you can imagine, a lot of the services that we pay for, from adult social care and the like, are outsourced. So I think it highlights just through that one example the great level of uncertainty we have in fixing the budget. But we are working through those savings and working through proposals and are keen to consult. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cartman. Any questions or comments from any colleagues? I can't... oh yes, Councillor Petty.
I just wanted to agree and confirm with Councillor Cartman that that aspect around our adult social care pressures that we face, the messaging that might come from government, nice big headlines, grab the headline on a front cover, and what it really means to our residents, and the role that the council plays in unpicking these messages. I've said it before, but I do believe that what adult social care is or means to our local residents is still a blurry, opaque page. It's not clear. When our residents have an elderly parent or are facing this in their household, they contact the council and they get a good service and they get help with their elderly residents. Or when they have a child with special additional needs or an adult with learning difficulties, then they reach out to the council and they get a quality service. But bundling this up from a personal experience into that kind of adult social care conversation, it feels like it slips from personal to jargon world. And I really worry that this government is good at headlines, but really not good at solving the fundamental issues that we face as a council in trying to help our residents. So just echoing what this report says, that although the government may be making headlines, we are the ones who will be having to foot the bill and still address the crisis on our doorstep.
Thank you. So we've got no further comments and questions. That's just for noting. So thank you, Councillor Cartman, for that report. Okay, so we're now on to item 14, which is the annual report of the North Somerset Safeguarding Adults Board. So we've got our Director of Adult Services, Hayley Verico, and Tony Oliver, the Chair of the Safeguarding Adults Board, with us, so both on Teams. So over to you, Hayley, to kick us off.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members. As you'll see, Tony Oliver has joined us, and Tony is the independent chair of the Safeguarding Adults Board. And prior to taking up his role as the independent chair, Tony had a long career in the police force, a very recognised career, and is very well respected. So in terms of Tony's role, it is to hold us all of the statutory board members, accountable for their safeguarding responsibilities and activities, including myself as the Director for Adult Social Care. Tony and I meet regularly to discuss what is going well and areas of concern, not only within adult social care, but within our partner organisations. Tony is subject to an annual appraisal, and he also reports to myself and Joe Walker and the Performance and Quality Board. And I feel that we've got a responsibility to fully inform members of our safeguarding activity. So I'm sure that Tony will be happy to take questions as he goes through his report. What I would say is that given that a number of members are relatively new, Tony will set the scene to give you some context to this annual report and what it means to us as a council. But I think you'll see that throughout COVID, all of the statutory bodies have worked really, really hard to ensure that we meet our statutory services and our responsibilities and our functions. You will see, and Tony will describe, that we've had a positive impact throughout COVID, and despite the pressures, being able to bring new people to the board and new agencies who are contributing really, really well. I think just to mention to you, although not in this reporting period, throughout COVID, we have seen a significant increase in self-neglect. And in next year's report, you will see that. And I'm telling you that so that it's no surprise, because a number of people, unfortunately, have died. And that has resulted in the highest number of safeguarding adult reviews that we've ever seen in North Somerset Council. So I'll hand over to you, Tony. And if you can't see Tony, I'll let you know if there are any hands up.
Okay, thank you very much, Hayley, and thank you, members, for offering me the opportunity to come and present the annual report for your safeguarding board here in North Somerset. Forgive me if I teach some of you to suck eggs, but as Hayley identified, I am aware that some of you may not be familiar with some of the background of the Care Act and the statutory responsibilities which were placed on the local authority by the Care Act. Since April 2015, there has been a requirement to have a safeguarding adults board in all local authorities, and best practice was deemed to be to have an independent chair of those boards. I've been in position as your independent chair now for 3 years, and I must say it's been thoroughly enjoyable. What I propose is I will go through the report and pick out some of the headlines, both some of the risk areas and some of the opportunities we've had to develop over the reporting period, which is from March of last year until March of this year. You will note that some of the data is still provisional data, and the reason for that is we brought forward the report by about 6 weeks to accommodate this meeting of yours. So the data which is presented may have some slight amendments when the final data for the local authority and indeed for other authorities is produced. I will also go through the report with the assumption that members have had the opportunity to read it, and I'm more than happy to take questions as we go through rather than waiting until the end of my presentation. So the report for 2020-2021, start off, yes, COVID has had a significant effect upon the work of the board and its subgroups, particularly, especially rather, in the final quarter of this reporting period. But nevertheless, as I say in my introduction, I feel that the board has done some excellent work, and we have identified, and I'll touch on what we propose to do over the next reporting period at the end. But as Hayley highlighted, despite COVID, we have had really good representation by using Teams. In fact, when we started using Teams, the number of partners who attended meetings increased, although there has been over the last meeting or so a slight decrease in that as other pressures with some of our partners. Example, we now have representation from the voluntary sector, a number of voluntary sector representatives on the board, and the information that they bring about the local area in North Somerset is extremely valuable. Vans is represented, and very unusually, we also have an independent deputy chair as well, that lady comes from the voluntary sector herself, so she's a very, very good and an excellent check and tester, as it were. We've also recruited somebody from the Department of Work and Pensions, and as members will be aware, there's been a significant increase in people who are reliant on various forms of assistance from the state. So their input into the board and the work we do is also valuable. The board has three main duties, and one is to develop and publish a strategic plan and also an annual report. They are statutory requirements under the provisions of the Care Act. And I'll come on to our strategic plan in a moment. And as Hayley highlighted, one of our other prime responsibilities is to commission safeguarding adults reviews. And a safeguarding adult review, a SAR as it's known, must be commissioned. Sorry. My apologies, that was my landline going. My wife's picked it up. I can't turn it off from up here, so apologies about that. It shows that I'm live though. The safeguarding adult reviews must be commissioned in certain circumstances where an adult with care and support needs has either died or been seriously injured in a local authority's area. That is a statutory requirement, and where there are concerns that partner organisations have not worked as best as they could have done with that individual. There's also the opportunity to do what's called voluntary safeguarding adult reviews, where the board and its subgroup think that there is learning to be achieved from whatever the incident is. And Hayley, I've just come out of a safeguarding adult review subgroup meeting, and we have commissioned, I'm sorry to say, 2 more safeguarding adult reviews just half an hour or so ago, and I'll give you the details of those in due course, not at this meeting, but outside of this meeting. The board is assisted by a number of subgroups, and I'll go through the various subgroups in a moment, and the subgroups are formed by partners from the board. So the 3 statutory partners, which must be represented on the board as per the Care Act, are the local authority, the CCG and the police. And then it is up to the board to decide upon which other partners within their area would be of benefit for the board to engage with. The subgroups, we have learning and development, quality assurance, that's the check and test to make sure the work of the board and the subgroups is fit for purpose. The policy and procedures subgroup, that's pretty well what it says on the tin. That's all about making sure that the local authority and partners are compliant with various legislation, and that we keep an eye on horizon scanning to see what policies, what legislation is coming out of central government, or indeed out of, for example, ADAS. We then have the Mental Capacity Act and the Deprivation of Liberties subgroup, and I'll go into more detail in a moment with them. We have a Tackling Adult Exploitation subgroup, and finally, I've already mentioned the SAR, Safeguarding Adult Review subgroup. On, if you're looking at the page numbers on page 13 of the report, that sets out some of the local data for North Somerset. And as I've said, there may be some very slight changes in that data. I would like to draw your attention to the self-neglect data, which is on the right-hand side of that particular screen. As Hayley says, forgive me, members, do you have access, electronic access to this report?
Yes, we do. Yes, thank you,
Yes,
Tony.
fine, thank you. As Hayley highlighted, the self-neglect has been a marked increase in self-neglect across North Somerset on quarter four of last year, and even more so for the existing period. And having identified that, I'm aware that the director sought for a more formal report to evidence the increase in self-neglect, which was provided to myself as the independent chair. I then wrote to all partners, effectively saying, look, we are aware of the increase in self-neglect and some of the reasons behind it. Now we have a duty to do something about it. And we have a meeting which will focus on purely self-neglect and what we can do to minimise and prevent it next month. So that was quite a rapid piece of work following the publication of the report which Hayley commissioned. Over the page, one of the areas which I'd like to bring to your attention is the location of neglect, and there's been a marked increase in own home locations, and that can be attributed to lockdown. We know that domestic abuse has increased over the last year or so, and interestingly, the number of abuse cases which are referred into the local authority in care homes has come down. That is because there are fewer people in care homes, and friends and relatives have taken people in some cases out, but they've gone into own home. One of the areas, the weaker areas of the reporting period, is under making safeguarding personal, which is one of the objectives of the Care Act. There is a requirement to ask individuals of their desired outcomes for an inquiry, and where the outcomes have not been achieved has increased, and again that can be attributed to lockdown. On page 15, that just sets out the work of the board, which I touched on. So some highlights for the Learning and Development subgroup. I mentioned Mental Capacity Act training and the Deprivation of Liberties. Mental Capacity Act training, there remains a misunderstanding amongst some frontline professionals around when an individual can question a person's desire to take a what they seem to be a bad course of action. So we have focused on Mental Capacity Act. We try to ensure that frontline professionals understand their responsibilities, understand what the legislation says, and understand what the guidance says about challenging individuals around mental capacity. And to assist in my understanding of mental capacity, I've undergone that training myself, to check and test the quality of the delivery of that training, and also, as I said, to learn more about it myself. And I'm confident that the picture we now have about professional understanding around MCA is a lot better than it was 12 or 18 months ago. The deprivation of liberties, some members may be aware that that has been replaced by something called the Liberty Protection Safeguarding, LPS. That was due to take effect in April of last year. That has been put back by the government because of COVID. We were expecting the guidance for that new legislation to come out in late summer. As yet, that has not been published, and I did hear just a few days ago that it could well be 2023 before that new legislation comes on stream. Having said that, I'm very conscious that there will be a huge training programme around the new legislation, and in order to streamline some of that training, I've spoken to independent chair colleagues across the Avon and Somerset police footprint, and we have agreement in principle to do joint training, so we maximise the effectiveness of that training with the other local authorities across Avon and Somerset police area, and including the clinical commissioning group. Moving to quality assurance, I mean, the purpose of quality assurance is to scrutinise the data and patterns and trends which come to our notice. An example of a really positive piece of partnership work is that in quarter three of last year, we began to notice an increase in safeguarding referrals from the South West Ambulance Service. And it was quite an interesting increase, and I just kept my eye on it for the following quarter, when there was an even more dramatic increase, and this was when COVID really started to hit. We then, with the data analysis person in the local authority, I asked her to do a little bit of background research, and it transpired that the ambulance service were making safeguarding referrals, but they weren't distinguishing between a safeguarding referral and concerns around an individual who had adult social care needs, and the two paths are completely separate. So I met with Simon Hester, the Southwest lead for SWAT. We went through the data. I provided the evidence about their referrals to the local authority here. It wasn't just in North Somerset, because I did some regional work around it as well. And very, very positive response from the Ambulance Trust in that they have just started using, as a pilot scheme at the moment, some new software where I'm informed that they will be able to distinguish between a safeguarding concern under Section 42 and an adult social care concern. That will strip out quite a lot of work from the single point of contact within the local authority, who have been inundated with concerns which fall outside of safeguarding concerns. The same is true of police data. I had a look at that, and I have a meeting next week. I did some regional work around Avon and Somerset police data, and all local authorities were having poor quality data from the police. I have now been asked by the Regional Independent Chairs Association to do a piece of work across Avon and Somerset and indeed wider, and I have my first meeting next Friday with the superintendent from Avon and Somerset Police, who has responsibility for police data, and I've circulated on behalf of the other 4 local authorities a wish list of what we would like to see coming out of Avon and Somerset Police, which would assist us locally in safeguarding vulnerable adults. The Policy and Procedures subgroup have been really effective over the reporting period, and there's a list of what they have achieved over that period. For those of you on the second bullet point, it says small s EDP, that is an advocacy service which has recently joined the P&P subgroup, and they are very valuable in the area of developing policies, and they will be even more valuable when LPS comes on board next year or possibly the year afterwards. MCA DOLS, I think I've gone through that in sufficient detail, unless members have any questions for that. But one point to highlight is when LPS comes on stream, the legislation is changing, because currently the Deprivation of Liberty Act only applies to people of or above the age of 18. When LPS comes on stream, that will apply to people of 16 to 18. So we, as an adults board, have given Children's Services notification of their need to engage with the adults safeguarding teams, because they will have a statutory responsibility for the 16 to 18-year-olds. They are aware of that, and there has to be closer working between Children's Services and Adult Services, in order to be compliant with that forthcoming piece of legislation. And I would ask members where they can influence in that area of engagement with the safeguarding adults, that they do whatever they can to get the Children's Services on board as well. It's taking a little while, I think is probably the best way for me to describe that. Tackling exploitation is our next subgroup. We have unfortunately had some fairly inconsistent chairing problems with this particular subgroup over the last year, and we did have a chair from Avon and Somerset Police. Unfortunately, that person has been long-term sick for the last 6 months or so. We were promised a new police chair who should have started at the beginning of October. That didn't materialise, but Hayley, you'll be pleased to know, with my SARS subgroup meeting this afternoon, I think I may have volunteered somebody to take over the chair of that subgroup. Watch this space on that one. I quite like volunteering people, as you know, Hayley, but trading standards are a key partner for the exploitation subgroup, because our exploitation subgroup, it isn't just about sexual exploitation, it's all aspects of exploitation. So everything which can be described, including female mutilation, the people trafficking, cuckooing, which is the taking over of vulnerable people's houses by, in the main, drugs groups, So it's a full gambit of exploitation, which is focused on by that subgroup. And trading standards have a really keen and valuable source of information around people trafficking, for example. If you go into how many of us go to a car wash to get our car cleaned, and the chances are they're usually managed by gang, or frequently they're managed by gangs, and usually some of those people will have been trafficked as well, and that's a key priority for trading standards. So their help is most valuable. The final subgroup is the Safeguarding Adult Review subgroup, which I've already touched on. And as Hayley said in her introduction, there has been a significant increase in the number of referrals, partly because we did some training, because up until the end of this reporting period, we hadn't had any referrals in for safeguarding adults. Oh, that's not correct. We had referrals coming in, but they didn't meet the criteria as defined by the Care Act. So we did some training for some of our partners in March of this year, which has resulted in an increase in referrals, and those increases have been more appropriate. But again, COVID has had a significant impact on the self-neglect referrals, and the two that I commissioned this afternoon both revolve around self-neglect, which is sad. So the way we manage those referrals is we engage an independent author to produce a report. We then have the recommendations which spin out of those reports. Those recommendations form an action plan, and that action plan will remain a live board item until all of the recommendations which the board and its partners can influence have been completed. If there is a recommendation which is outside the scope of the adults board, Chair, I'm nearly there. I can see you looking at your watch. If we have a recommendation which we cannot influence, then we will pick that up with the relevant partner organisation. An example of that, which again came out of my meeting this afternoon, is I will be writing to the CQC in relation to some activity which we cannot by ourselves influence. Next steps. I have a real desire, and with Hayley's support, to make the board a more preventative board. So we are doing a lot of work around trying to have the early identification of people and groups of people who may need care and support needs in the future. It's a cost-effective way of doing business, because it is far cheaper and easier to nip a problem in the bud when it's a small issue, as opposed to when it reaches its ultimate end of life SAR referral. So that is one of the aspirations that I would like to achieve with the board. We are also having a look at our structure of both the board and the subgroups. I believe the board to be too big at the moment, and as try as I might to keep it strategic, very often we move into the operational, and that's not the function of a board, that's the function of its subgroups. So that's a little piece of ongoing work which I'm leading on at the moment. And Chair, happy to take any questions at all.
Thanks very much, Tony. That was a really comprehensive report, and I know colleagues will have looked through the report that went out with the papers as well. I'm keeping an eye out just in case there are any questions, but can I just say that I hope that everyone has sort of taken on board the breadth and importance of the work that the Safeguarding Adults Board does. You know, we're talking about the most serious and critical cases affecting adults in our community, and it's absolutely right that there should be good, strong assessment of those cases, reviews where they're appropriate, and that we put together the right kinds of actions. And it's really helpful to have Tony and the other partners involved around the table at the board to make sure that we're doing the right things, that we learn lessons where we can, and exactly as you said in your final point there, Tony, that prevention becomes hopefully our way of working. So I've got a couple of questions, so Councillor Gibbons and then Councillor Petty.
Thank you. I've just got a question around your tackling exploitation subgroup, and I just wondered, do you have a specific area of work which looks at the increasing financial exploitation, I would say, of vulnerable and elderly people online? Because that is something that wasn't an area, but I've known in my community a number of older people have gone online, have been helped to go online because of lockdown, and aren't perhaps as au fait with it as, well, some of us might be. I don't include myself. And I know of people in my area who have been conned into paying for things online, for donating money to spurious things, and then been rung up, and there's been fraud involved. So is that an area you're looking at? Because I think it's quite a new and sadly developing area of targeting the vulnerable.
Yes, we do. We look at those vulnerabilities. I mentioned cuckooing just now. We have had presentations on scams. We have had presentations on what is known as mate crime. That is where that is a particularly prevalent scam at the moment. We've also had presentations about gambling because there's significant social care risks around gambling and some of the cons which come through the system. And in all of those areas, with the exception of gambling, trading standards are key partners to assist us. So yes is the answer.
Thank you. So I've got Councillor Petty and then Councillor Cartman.
Thank you very much, Tony. I found the report stark and shocking and concerning, but also welcomed all the work that you and panel members are doing. I welcome the fact that you said that it's the different partners that are involved. I think I have a couple of different questions and points. Well, the first one was you mentioned about that potentially the ambulance service had been sometimes referring to safeguarding versus referring to appropriate adult social care. And I just thought about the role that the councillors have and the role that we have with our communities beyond that, so community groups, churches, town and parish councils. And I can see there's a link in the report, but I did wonder if there might be a kind of short, almost one-page summary when to refer to adult services and when to refer to safeguarding, and whether that's something that we as leaders in our community, as elected members, might share with our networks, with churches, and just kind of to feel better informed. I do appreciate the report does something, but it's what to do next when you see this, and when is the time. So if that felt like that was something that you might be interested in. I'll just put two more points, which was interesting on the tackling exploitation. I wondered whether GWR was, so kind of transport partners, the rail, I think that potentially they would have an interest in partnering. I know that the police have mentioned to me how, so obviously I'm referring more to county lines, and I do think that that situation has evolved, is what the police told me, but the transport providers recognise their role in that as well. And then I guess another area of exploitation, interesting that Councillor Gibbons raised the older residents being vulnerable online, but BBC Three iPlayer has a programme at the moment about young people being vulnerable to financial fraud. There was something about squares. It's kind of social media ways that young people are being encouraged to get a debit card or credit card, and somebody they do not know uses their address for fraudulent activity. So I guess we've got that exploitation in so many guises going on. And so thank you very much for all the work you're doing, all the different areas that we have to try to pick up. I welcome the fact that you're doing partnership working, and I hope that we can continue to share our work as you come up with good good information for us that we can pass that to North Somerset together and to other partners in our area.
Okay, thank you for that. Picking up in order, the referrals which you mentioned from the ambulance service, there is a document. Those referrals under the Care Act come under section 42, and there has been, as I said, some training for partners around what is an adult social care safeguarding referral as opposed to. So if you wish, I can share some of the documents around the training that we have done around section 42 with elected members. Your second point around GWR, British Transport Police are members of the board. They don't attend every board meeting, but they do attend on a needs basis. And unfortunately, that need is very often related to suicide on the railway line. And I'm sure you'll be aware of the instances around Whirl railway station over the last couple of years or so. So we have done quite a bit of work around with BTP around that. And then your final point about the young people, and part of the presentation we had at the last board meeting, or was it the one before, Hayley? No, it was the last one, from an organisation called GamCare. We spoke about some of the gambling addictions and the exploitation by some of the firms presenting the software for the games that young people use, and how they are encouraged to use credit cards and debit cards. And then the spiral of gambling just increases. Bearing in mind, we are a Safeguarding Adults Board, so certainly I used to chair the Safeguarding Children's Board before the legislation changed a couple of so years ago. But yes, very conscious about the pressures on young children around gambling as well.
So the programme, it's just worth checking out. It's on iPlayer, is not specifically gambling. It's almost how our young people, and it is probably adults being manipulated to. It's a slightly different scam, but if you get the chance, it's worth checking it out. It was like half an hour on iPlayer, so it's just another thing for us to be aware of, really. And also, as you mentioned, that the regulations were changing to include over 16s. I just thought that was kind of something that's going to be more on the radar, but I think it is applying to over 18-year-olds as well. Also, I wonder if it's not reported as frequently. So some of these things where the police might not get involved, but it is impactful on people's lives. So just thought I'd share.
Thank you. I noted that.
Okay, thanks very much. And the final question from Councillor Cartman.
No, thank you, Chair. Hi, Tony, and thank you for all your detailed work. And to echo everyone else, I really appreciate the fact that you undertake this work in the panel. I'm one of those people that you referred to at the beginning that don't really have a background in this area. So my question's quite simple, really, and I'm going to put you on the spot, perhaps unfairly. I mean, are you satisfied that our local safeguarding arrangements are in place and that they are good enough?
Very broad question. Yes is the answer, but we could do better.
Okay.
The lack of a business manager for the last couple of years has significantly impaired what we could be doing. We have now recently appointed a business manager, as I believe I mentioned earlier on, and the work of that individual will be to enhance and improve the knowledge around local safeguarding across North Somerset. Where we have fallen down, in my opinion, is I have a very, I like learning from other people's reports, and we haven't had the ability to look at national reviews around safeguarding at all. But that individual, I made sure part of his job description was to include learning from other areas. So we're doing as well as we could without a business manager. I am absolutely confident that next year's report will be an improvement on the activity that we've done over this reporting period.
That's great. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much. And thank you again, Hayley and Tony, for all your work and for the really helpful report. So that's for noting members. So we'll move on to item 15, which is the draft calendar of exec meetings for 22-23. Can I have a proposer and seconder? So Councillor Caniford and Councillor Solomon. Everyone okay with that? Oh, no, Councillor Petty would like to make a comment.
We were just discussing earlier in the week how, so prior to COVID, when we discussed the executive meetings, we wanted to do what we could to ensure that the executive were as accessible to our residents as possible. So prior to COVID, we weren't streaming our meetings online, and we discussed going to different locations and also different times of day. And in that context, things have changed. We now broadcast our meetings live on YouTube. And so, although as a group we were talking about this earlier in the week, and what we want is we want as many residents to be able to access our meetings. And actually, I've also had meetings with Councillor Richardson about how we get public engagement. So I could have come saying, I think we should move around the region, because I think at times that is really important. But actually what I think I'm going to propose is just that at this time, with COVID numbers still sadly high in our area, as we found from Councillor Davies today, as long as we continue to stream this on YouTube and we give people access to be able to tune into our meetings, then I think that, although I'm not going to push for us to go physically to other places, I welcome the fact that we'll continue to air these on YouTube. I would like us to look later on those dates to see if we could put some of them in the evening, so that those who work 9 till 5 could have access to our meetings. And I hope that we will see more and more public engagement in the coming year, because we're here to represent our residents and we want to hear from them.
Okay, thanks, Bridget. What I would suggest then is that if, as part of agreeing these dates, if we can agree that officers could discuss with the chairman, Councillor Davis, options for moving some meetings to 6 p.m. I think one of the issues that officers have had previously is trying to find times that don't clash with town and parish council meetings. So I know it's not straightforward, but the point's well made, and I think a number of us would agree with you that we need to be as flexible as possible. So if we can take that away and allow officers to explore options on that for 22-23, is that okay, colleagues? Yeah, great. Okay. Oral reports. So before the meeting, everyone said they had no oral reports. So I'm going to, great, look at that, perfect, well done everyone. We've got no urgent business. So at 12 minutes past 4, I declare that you have got urgent business. You've got an oral report. You've got to be quicker than this, guys, come on.
We have a joint oral report, don't we?
We do.
Yes.
I'll pretend I didn't close the meeting, okay?
Right. It's
so,
just
is it a double act or what?
It's
What
a
is
double
this?
act, yes.
Okay, Councillor Gibbons,
Yes.
Councillor Bridger.
Right. Well, I was just going to say that from our point of view in Children's Services, believe we are on track, as hoped, to get the pupils back into Ravenswood's main school after half term, 1st of November, and I will defer to the other part of the double act to make sure that the building side of things is definitely on track.
I will be very brief. You didn't actually finish the sentence, Chair, so we're allowed. Yeah, no, seriously, this obviously refers to the water ingress problems we had at Ravenswood School on 2 occasions. Pleased to note that in terms of the main building, the remaining works for the main building are on track to be completed by the end of next month, by the end of November, as scheduled. Obviously, the second leak in the annex caused a number of children having to be relocated to the campus here in Weston, didn't it, for a few weeks. Again, good progress has been made to the annex in the last couple of weeks. It's watertight. I think the works on the roof are about 90% complete, actually. New carpets and ceiling tiles are being fitted this week. And again, I think we're on track for the annex to be reoccupied by those children who relocated to Weston after half term. I think that's Monday, the 1st of November, and I think my understanding is everything that needs to be moved from the campus, furniture and equipment and things, will be moved on Friday this week and reinstalled it at Ravenswood. So again, I mean, apologies for the huge disruption that caused to the children, parents, carers, and obviously those that work at the school. But we had a plan, and we're carrying it out. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, both. Is this a question? You shouldn't really have questions on oral reports. You can ask them afterwards. They're not going anywhere. Okay, thank you very much. On that note, thank you, officers. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, those of you on Teams who've stuck with us. I am going to close the meeting at whatever time it is, 4:14. Thank you.